What started as the most embarrassing pickup line in history became a journey through age gaps, family drama, and the kind of love that makes you question everything you thought you knew about timing, courage, and taking the biggest risk of your life. I'm Alex, and at 31, I'm pretty sure I had life figured out. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Or at least I thought I did until 6 months ago, when everything I believed about relationships, timing, and what I wanted went completely sideways. I work as a freelance software developer here in Portland, Oregon, spending most of my days in coffee shops with my laptop, debugging code and pretending I'm some kind of digital nomad, when really, I'm just a guy who can't afford proper office space. Portland suits me. The kind of place where the walls are thin enough to hear my neighbor's entire Netflix viewing habits. But the rent is cheap enough that I can actually save a little money each month. It's furnished with a combination of hand-me-downs from my sister Emma and stuff I found on Craigslist that looked like it wouldn't collapse immediately. My pride and joy is my coffee setup, though. A espresso machine I splurged on last Christmas because I figured if I was going to live in Portland, I might as well take coffee seriously. The thing about being a freelancer is that your social life becomes whatever happens between client calls and project deadlines. Most of my human interaction happens at Grind Coffee on Hawthorne, this little independent place that's become my unofficial office. The baristas know my order. I have my regular table by the window, and I've developed what you might generously call a routine. Wake up, shower, grab my laptop bag, and head to Grind by 9 a.m. It's predictable, it's safe, and it keeps me productive. But here's the thing about routine. It makes you comfortable, maybe too comfortable. At 31, I hadn't been on a real date in 8 months. The last relationship I had was with Sarah, another developer I met at a tech meet. We dated for 6 months, and it was fine, just fine. We had the same interests, similar career, goals, and absolutely zero spark. When she moved to Seattle for a job opportunity, we both agreed it was for the best. No drama, no heartbreak, just a mutual shrug and a promise to stay in touch that we both knew we wouldn't keep. My dating history reads like a collection of almosts and not quites. There was Jessica from college, who was perfect on paper, but made me feel like I was auditioning for the role of boyfriend. There was Amanda from my last corporate job, who was brilliant and funny until she decided I wasn't ambitious enough. And there was Claire, who I met through a dating app, and who spent our entire first date explaining why she didn't believe in second dates. Clearly, that philosophy worked out well for both of us. The pattern was always the same. I'd meet someone. We'd have a few good conversations, maybe a couple of decent dates, and then something would fizzle out. Either they'd lose interest, or I would, or we'd both just kind of drift apart without ever really trying to fight for it. Emma, my older sister, has a theory that I'm afraid of commitment, but I think it's simpler than that. I just hadn't met anyone who made me want to fight for it. Emma lives in Seattle now with her husband Mark and their 2 kids.
Oh.
And she calls me every Sunday to check in and subtly inquire about my love life. She's 4 years older than me and has always felt responsible for my general well-being, which is sweet but also exhausting. According to Emma, my problem is that I'm too picky and not brave enough to take real risks. According to me, my problem is that I keep meeting people who want to change me into someone I'm not. Work was going well, though. Had a steady roster of clients, mostly small businesses needing websites or apps developed. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me the freedom to work from wherever I wanted. My biggest client was a local startup called Greenspace, developing an app for urban gardening. The founder, Marcus, was one of those eternally optimistic entrepreneur types who believed his app was going to revolutionize how people think about growing food in small spaces. I admired his passion, even if I couldn't quite share his conviction that the world was desperately waiting for another gardening app. The work itself was satisfying in that methodical way that coding can be. There's something comforting about problems that have logical solutions, where you can trace every error back to its source and fix it with the right combination of syntax and logic. Real life, I was learning, doesn't compile as cleanly. My social circle in Portland was small but solid. There was Jake, another freelancer who specialized in graphic design and had strong opinions about the proper coffee-to-whiskey ratio. There was my upstairs neighbor Zoe, a nurse who worked irregular shifts and always seemed to be either heading to work or coming home from work, usually with stories that made my debugging sessions seem wonderfully drama-free. And there was Marcus, from Greenspace, who'd evolved from client to friend over the past year of working together, but mostly it was just me, my laptop, and whatever was happening at Grind Coffee on any given day. I was content, if not exactly thrilled, with the rhythm I'd found. Work, coffee shop, home, repeat. It wasn't exciting, but it was stable. And after a series of relationships that had taught me the value of emotional safety, stable felt like enough, at least. It felt like enough until that Tuesday morning in March when routine went completely out the window. And I learned that sometimes the best things in life start with the worst. Pickup lines. Tuesday started like every other Tuesday. I walked into Grind Coffee at exactly 9:15, laptop bag slung over my shoulder, already mentally organizing my to-do list for the day. Marcus had sent me a late-night email about some bugs in the Greenspace app, and I had a client call scheduled for 11. Nothing unusual, nothing that suggested my entire worldview was about to get flipped inside out. The morning crowd was the usual mix of freelancers, students, and people having what looked like very serious business meetings over lattes. I nodded. To Kevin behind the counter, tall guy with a man bun, who knew my order by heart, and headed toward my usual spot by the window. That's when I saw her. She was sitting at my table. Now, I know that sounds possessive, but when you've been coming to the same coffee shop for 2 years and sitting at the same table every day, you develop a certain territorial instinct. It's not officially my table, but everyone who's a regular at Grind knows that the corner table by the big window is Alex's spot. Except today, this woman was there with a MacBook Pro, a stack of papers, and what looked like architectural drawings. Spread across the surface, she was maybe 50-something, with this striking silver blonde hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless, but probably took 20 minutes to achieve. She wore a black blazer over dark jeans, the kind of outfit. That said, I'm successful but approachable. What caught my attention wasn't just that she was beautiful, though, she definitely was, but that she looked completely at home in my space, like she belonged there more than I did. I stood there for a moment, laptop bag getting heavy on my shoulder, trying to decide whether to claim the table next to the bathroom that nobody wants, or just find another coffee shop entirely. That's when she looked up and caught me staring. "You must be Alex," she said, and her voice had this warm, slightly raspy quality that made my name sound more interesting than it had any right to. "Kevin told me this was your table. I'm sorry, I can move if you need it." I blinked. Yes. Had told her about me? "No, it's fine," I managed, which was a lie because it definitely wasn't fine, but I couldn't exactly kick someone out of a public seating area. "I'll just grab that table over there." "Don't be ridiculous," she said, already gathering her papers into a neat stack. "There's plenty of room here. I'm Diana, by the way. Diana Chen." And that's how I found myself sitting across from a woman I'd never met, trying to pretend I could concentrate on debugging code while stealing glances at her architectural drawings. She was working on what looked like renovation plans for some kind of mixed-use building, occasionally making notes in the margins with a fountain pen that probably cost more than my laptop. "Architect?" asked after about 10 minutes of sitting in slightly awkward silence. "Urban planner," she corrected, not looking up from her work. "Though I do some architectural consulting on the side. These are plans for a community center in North Portland. Low-income housing upstairs, community resources downstairs." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The cities. Actually moving forward with it, which is a minor miracle. I was impressed, despite myself. That sounds amazing and complicated. She looked up then. Really looked at me for the first time since we'd sat down. Complicated is an understatement. Between the city council, the neighborhood association, the funding committee, and the contractors, I sometimes feel like I'm herding cats. Very opinionated, bureaucratic cats. That made me laugh, which seemed to surprise both of us. I debug software for a living, I said. At least when cats have bugs, they don't argue with you about the fix? Oh, you're a developer, she said. And there was something in her tone I couldn't quite read. Kevin mentioned you were in tech. What kind of stuff do you work on? So I told her about Greenspace, about my other clients, about the strange satisfaction of solving problems that it had. Clear, logical solutions. She listened with the kind of attention that made me feel like what I was saying actually mattered, asking questions that showed she understood more about technology than most people twice my age. That's fascinating, she said when I finished. Explaining the urban gardening app. There's actually been some discussion about incorporating tech solutions into the community center project. Smart building systems, maybe an app for residents to book shared spaces, ... We talked for another 20 minutes about technology and urban planning, about Portland's development challenges, about the weird satisfaction of creating something useful from nothing but ideas and determination. It was the kind of conversation I'd always hoped to have with someone, but never seemed to manage on actual dates. That's when I made the mistake of trying to be charming. We'd been talking about age demographics and urban planning, about how different generations approach technology and community spaces differently. Diana had mentioned something about bridging generational gaps in design, and somehow that led to us talking about generational differences in dating and relationships. I think people our age have different expectations, she was saying. Less game playing, more honesty about what we want. And that's when my brain decided to take a vacation and leave my mouth in charge. Yeah, totally, I said, nodding sagely like I had any idea what I was talking about. I mean, if you were 42, I'd probably commit to whatever you were planning. Community center, urban planning revolution, whatever. The words hung in the air between us like a bad smell. Diana's eyebrows went up, not in offense, but in what looked like genuine amusement. I felt my face turn approximately the same color as the Grind Coffee logo. That's an interesting approach to urban planning, she said slowly, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. But I'm 53, Alex. Does that stop you? I stared at her, trying to process what had just happened. She wasn't offended. She wasn't getting up to leave. She was actually teasing me, playing along with my ridiculous attempt at whatever. That had been... Honestly, I said, surprised by my own honesty. I don't think it does. Diana laughed then, a real laugh that made other people in the coffee shop turn to look. Well, she said, closing her laptop with a decisive click, it might be the most unconventional project proposal I've gotten all week, and that's how I accidentally asked a 53-year-old urban planner to revolutionize Portland's community development with me. All because I couldn't figure out how to make normal small talk about the weather. The next few days, I found myself arriving at Grind Coffee earlier than usual, telling myself it was to get a better start on work, but really hoping Diana would show up again. She didn't come back Wednesday or Thursday. And by Friday, I was convinced I'd imagined the whole thing. Or that my spectacularly awkward commit comment had scared her off permanently. But Friday afternoon, just as I was packing up my laptop and accepting that I'd probably never see her again, she walked through the door. This time she was wearing a green sweater that brought out her eyes and carrying what looked like a model of a building made from white cardboard and tiny wooden pieces. "Is this seat taken?" she asked, gesturing to the chair across from me with a smile that suggested she remembered our conversation perfectly. "Only if you're planning another urban planning revolution," I said, trying to match her playful tone while internally celebrating that she'd come back. "Actually," she said carefully, setting the architectural model on the table, "I brought you something." She turned the model toward me, and I could see it was a detailed miniature of the community center she'd been working on. Tiny figures populated the spaces, families in the courtyard, people entering what looked like a library, kids playing. In a small playground area. "This is incredible," I said, leaning in to examine the details. "You made this?" "It's part of my presentation to the city council next week," she explained. "But I wanted to show you because of what you said about technology integration. I've been thinking about your gardening app, about how community spaces could incorporate tech solutions without losing their human element." She pointed to different areas of the model, explaining how QR codes could link to resources, How residents could use an app to book shared spaces or coordinate community events. How technology could enhance rather than replace human connection. Her passion was infectious, and I found myself offering suggestions, thinking out loud about user interfaces and accessibility features. "You really get it," she said after I'd sketched out a rough wireframe on a napkin. "Most tech people I talk to want to solve everything with an app, even problems that don't need solving. But you're thinking about the people first." "Well, that's the thing about gardening apps," I said. "If you forget about the actual gardening part, you just end up with a very expensive plant-killing device." So that made her laugh, and I realized I was getting addicted to that sound. We talked for another hour, long enough for Kevin to start giving us looks that suggested we were approaching the coffee shop, equivalent of overstaying our welcome. But Diana didn't seem to notice, and I definitely wasn't about to point it out. "Can I ask you something?" she said, as we finally started gathering our things. "What made you choose freelancing? You seem like you could work anywhere, big tech. Company, startup, whatever." I paused, not sure how honest to be. I tried the corporate thing for a couple years after college. Good salary, good benefits, the whole package. But there were so many layers between the work and the actual impact. By the time my code made it to users, it had been filtered through so many committees and focus groups that it barely resembled what I'd built, and freelancing is different. With freelancing, when I fix something, it's actually fixed. When I build something that helps Marcus's urban gardening app work better, I can see people using it. It's smaller scale, but it's real. Diana nodded slowly. "I get that." I spent 10 years at a big architecture firm before I went out on my own. The projects were impressive, but they were all about impressing other architects, not about actually serving communities. This community center project, it's going to take 3 years, and the budget is a fraction of what I used to work with, but it might actually change people's lives. "Is that why you left the architecture firm?" "That was part of it," she said, and something in her tone suggested there was more to the story. "I also got divorced about 5 years ago. Gary, my ex-husband, he was also an architect. We worked together, lived together. Basically existed in this bubble where everything was about the next big project, the next award, the next step up the ladder." She was quiet for a moment, staring at her hands. When we split up, I realized I'd been living someone else's version of success for 15 years. I didn't even know what I actually wanted anymore. "That sounds terrifying," I said softly. It was at 48. I suddenly had to figure out who I was without half of an architectural power couple identity. I moved to Portland, started over. Took on projects that mattered to me instead of ones that looked good on a resume. She looked up at me. "What about you? Ever been married?" "No," I said, probably too quickly. "Came close once, but no. I think I've been too careful maybe. Too afraid of making the wrong choice." "Careful isn't always wrong," Diana said. "But at some point, you have to decide whether you're being careful or just scared." Hung between us, I had the uncomfortable feeling she could see right through whatever facade I'd been maintaining about being content with my small, safe life. "Can I tell you something?" she continued, "when you made that ridiculous comment about committing to my urban planning projects, my first thought wasn't that you were hitting on me. It was that you were the first person in months to seem genuinely excited about my work. Not because it might advance your own career or because you were trying to impress me, but because you actually cared about the ideas. Your work is genuinely exciting," I said. "Spent that whole first day reading about urban planning after you left. Did you know Portland's one of only 12 cities in the country with a comprehensive plan for climate-adaptive community development?" She stared at me for a moment, then broke into that laugh again. "You researched urban planning?" "I may have fallen down a Wikipedia rabbit hole," I admitted, "and bought a book. Or 3. "Alex," she said, and the way she said my name made my chest tighten. "I think you might be dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "The kind of dangerous that makes a woman reconsider her very sensible decision to focus on work and avoid complicated relationships with charming younger men who ask pointed questions about life choices." I felt myself grinning like an idiot. "Is that what I'm doing?" "That's exactly what you're doing," she said, standing up and slinging her bag over her shoulder. "And it's working far better than it should." As she headed toward the door, she turned back. Alex, same time Monday, I'll bring the latest revisions, and you can tell me more about those urban planning books. I watched her leave architectural model tucked carefully under her arm and realized that my quiet, predictable life had just become significantly more complicated. And for the first time in years, complicated felt like exactly what I wanted. That weekend I made the mistake of mentioning Diana to my sister Emma during our usual Sunday call. I thought I was being casual about it, just mentioning that I'd met someone interesting at the coffee shop. But Emma has a supernatural ability to detect romantic interest through phone calls. And within 30 seconds she was in full interrogation mode. "Wait, back up," she said, and I could practically hear her settling in for a long conversation. "You voluntarily talked to a woman you didn't know, without being forced into it by social circumstances?" "It wasn't that dramatic," I protested. "She was sitting at my table. We started talking about work stuff." And this woman, what's she like? Age? Job? She's single?" "Please tell me she's not another developer who thinks JavaScript is a personality trait." I laughed, despite myself. "She's an urban planner. She's working on this community center project that's actually really fascinating." "And yes, she's single. Divorced." There was a pause. "How divorced? Like recently divorced and still processing? Or divorced and ready to date again?" 5 years ago, I said. "And what do you mean how divorced? Is there a scale?" "Alex there is absolutely a scale. Fresh divorce means she's either rebounding or still angry at all men. 5 years means she's had time to figure out what she wants. This is good intel. What else?" I found myself telling Emma about Diana's architectural model, about her passion for community development, about how easy it was to talk to her. What I didn't mention was the age gap. Partly because I wasn't sure how Emma would react, and partly because I was still processing it myself. "You sound different," Emma said when I finished. "Happy different. When's the last time you talked about a woman like this?" "It's like what? Like you actually care whether you see her again?" Before I could answer, Emma had to go deal with some crises, involving her 6-year-old and what sounded like finger paint on the bathroom walls. But her words stuck with me. Did I sound different? And if so, what did that mean? I got my answer Monday morning when I walked in to grind coffee, and Jake, my graphic designer friend, was already there waiting for me with 2 cups and a knowing smirk. "So," Jake said as I sat down, "Kevin tells me you've been holding hands and making hard eyes with some woman old enough to be your, well, older sister." "Kevin needs to mind his own business," I said, accepting the coffee. "And we weren't holding hands. But you're not denying the hard eyes. Jake is the kind of friend who delights in other people's romantic complications. Mostly because his own love life is a carefully managed series of casual relationships that never quite turn into anything serious. He's got strong opinions about dating, most of which involve being more direct than I'm comfortable with." "Tell me about her," he said, leaning back in his chair like he was settling in for entertainment. So I told him about Diana, about our conversations, about how she challenged me to think differently about technology and community impact. Jake listened with increasing amusement, occasionally making faces that suggested he was drawing conclusions I wasn't going to like. "Okay," he said when I finished. "First question, how old is she? Does it matter? The fact that you're dodging?" "The question means it definitely matters." "Come on, Alex. How old?" 53, I admitted. Jake's eyebrows shot up. 53, dude. That's a whole different generation. "She probably remembers when MTV played music videos." "It's not that big a deal," I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced myself. "Not that big a deal? Alex, when you were born, she was already in college. When you were learning to drive, she was probably getting married to her ex-husband." "Okay, when you put it like that, it sounds worse." "I'm not saying it's bad," Jake said quickly. "I'm just saying it's significant." "What do you even have in common besides urban planning and coffee?" That question bothered me more than it should have. What did Diana and I have in common? We'd talked icily enough, but was that just the novelty of meeting someone new? Or was there something deeper there? Before I could spiral too far into overthinking, Diana walked in. She spotted us immediately and waved, then went to order her coffee. Jake watched this interaction with the intense focus of a nature documentary narrator observing exotic wildlife. "Is that her?" he whispered. "Yes, that's her." "Okay, I take back what I said about the age thing. She's gorgeous. Also, she's coming over here, so try not to look like you've been discussing her like she's a fascinating specimen." Diana approached our table, carrying her usual black coffee and a small wrapped package. "Alex, hi, I brought you something." Set the package down in front of me, then looked at Jake expectantly. "Oh, sorry," I said, scrambling to make introductions. "Diana, this is Jake. Jake. Diana." The graphic designer Diana said, shaking Jake's hand. "Alex mentioned you. I actually looked at your portfolio online. Your work is really impressive." Jake practically glowed under the praise. "Thanks. Alex told me about your community center project. Sounds like fascinating work." "It is when I'm not drowning in zoning regulations and budget meetings," Diana said, settling into the third chair at our table. "Alex, open your present." Inside the package was a book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs. The cover was worn, and there were notes in the margins, in what looked like Diana's handwriting. "This is my copy from grad school," she explained. "I thought you might appreciate Jacobs' perspective on how technology and community development should work together." She was writing in the 60s, but her ideas about organic urban growth are still revolutionary. I flipped through the pages, seeing Diana's careful annotations, her questions and observations in the margins. It felt incredibly personal, like she was sharing part of her intellectual history with me. "This is amazing," I said. "Are you sure? You want to lend it out? Keep it," she said. "I've got the ideas memorized by now. Besides, I'm curious what you'll think of her arguments about the role of technology in community spaces." Jake had been watching this exchange with growing fascination. "You two are like the nerdiest couple I've ever seen," he said. "And I mean that is a compliment," Diana laughed. "We're not a couple, Jake. We're just ... collaborating." "Right," Jake said with a grin that suggested he wasn't buying that explanation for a second. "Collaborating. Got it." As Diana excused herself to take a work call, Jake leaned across the table toward me. "Okay, I officially retract all my concerns about the age thing." "No." "Yeah. Did you see the way she looked at you when she gave you that book? And the way you looked at her? Plus, anyone who can make urban planning sound sexy definitely has something special going on." "She didn't make urban planning sound sexy, Alex. You've been talking about zoning laws for 20 minutes like they're the most fascinating thing in the world. If that's not the power of attraction, I don't know what is?" As Diana returned to the table, I realized Jake might have a point. I was definitely in deeper than I'd admitted to myself, and based on the way Diana smiled when she sat back down, I might not be the only one. 3 days later, Diana showed up at Grind Coffee, looking completely different. Gone was the confident urban planner with architectural models and passionate presentations. Instead, she sat across from me with slumped shoulders, staring into her coffee like it held answers to questions she didn't want to ask. "Rough day?" I ventured, closing my laptop to give her my full attention. She let out a bitter laugh. "The city council meeting was yesterday. 3 hours of explaining why a community center in North Portland matters, why low-income housing doesn't automatically mean decreased property values, why investing in community resources actually strengthens neighborhoods." "How did it go?" "They tabled it," she said flatly. "Again, 4th time in 8 months. They want more community input, which is code for, we're hoping this goes away if we ignore it long enough." I could see the frustration radiating from her, but there was something deeper there too. Something that looked like defeat. "I'm sorry," I said. "That has to be incredibly frustrating." "You know what the worst part is?" Diana continued, finally looking up at me. I sat there listening to these council members, most of whom have never lived in the neighborhoods. They're making decisions about fiscal responsibility in community standards, and I realized they see me as this idealistic woman playing with unrealistic dreams. Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, and I felt something twist in my chest. "Diana, I'm 53, Alex, she interrupted. When I was your age, I thought I had all the time in the world to make a difference. I thought if I just worked hard enough, was smart enough, presented the right arguments in the right way, I could change things. But maybe I'm too old to still believe in fairy tale endings. The vulnerability in her voice hit me like a physical blow. This confident, passionate woman who challenged me to think bigger, who'd made urban planning sound like the most important work in the world, suddenly seemed fragile in a way that made me want to fix everything for her. Hey, I said softly, reaching across the table to touch her hand. You're not too old for anything. And what you're doing isn't a fairy tale. It's necessary work that matters. She looked down at my hand covering hers. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just kidding myself. Gary, my ex-husband, he used to say I was too emotional about projects, that I took things too personally. Maybe he was right. Your ex-husband sounds like he was an idiot, I said, surprised by the force in my own voice. He's taking things personally isn't a weakness when those things actually matter. You're fighting for people who don't have anyone else fighting for them. Diana was quiet for a long moment, her fingers curling slightly under mine. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? I nodded. When Gary and I split up, it wasn't just because we grew apart. He was having an affair with a junior architect at our firm. 28 years old, brilliant portfolio, looked at him like he was Frank Lloyd Wright, reincarnated. She paused, taking a shaky breath. When I confronted him about it, he said it wasn't personal, that I'd become professionally stagnant, and he needed someone who shared his vision for the future. Jesus, Diana. The thing is, part of me believed him. I spent 2 years in therapy trying to figure out if I really had become stagnant, if my interest in community-focused work was just me giving up on real success. She looked up at me with eyes that were bright with unshed tears. That's why yesterday hurt so much. Every time someone dismisses my work, I hear Gary's voice telling me I'm not good enough anymore. I felt a surge of anger at a man I'd never met, followed immediately by a fierce protectiveness that surprised me. Diana, listen to me. Gary was protecting his own ego by tearing down yours. Community-focused work isn't giving up on success. It's the hardest kind of success there is because it requires you to care about something bigger than yourself. Is that what you think? She asked quietly. I think you're the most professionally inspiring person I've ever met, I said honestly. I think Gary was threatened by your passion because his work was probably hollow and competitive, and he knew it. I think if the city council can't see the value in what you're proposing, that says everything about them and nothing about you. A single tear slipped down her cheek. You really believe that? I believe in you, I said, and realized as I said it that it was completely true. I believe in what you're doing, and I believe you're going to find a way to make it happen, even if it takes longer than you hoped. Diana squeezed my hand. Alex, can I ask you something? Why are you here? I mean, really here with me? Listening to all this? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I mean, you're 31 years old, you're talented and kind and funny, and you could probably be dating someone your own age who doesn't come with decades of professional baggage and divorce trauma. Why are you sitting here holding hands with a woman who just spent 20 minutes crying about a city council meeting? I looked at her tear-stained face, at the way she was trying to smile through her vulnerability, and realized I'd never been more attracted to anyone in my life, because, I said slowly, this is the first time anyone has ever trusted me enough to fall apart in front of me. And because when you talk about your work, even when you're frustrated and defeated, you light up in a way that makes me want to be part of whatever you're building. Diana stared at me for a long moment. That might be the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. Really? Because I was going for a supportive colleague. She laughed then, a real laugh that seemed to surprise both of us. Alex, I think we might be in trouble. What kind of trouble? The kind where 53 and 31 starts to feel like just numbers instead of a fundamental incompatibility. As we sat there, hands intertwined across a coffee shop table, I realized she was absolutely right. We're definitely in trouble. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both natural and impossible. Diana and I met at Grind Coffee almost daily, ostensibly to work, but really to continue the conversations that had started with urban planning and somehow expanded to cover everything from childhood fears to professional dreams to the weird satisfaction of finding the perfect playlist for different types of work. Emma had started texting me daily updates that ranged from "How's your lady friend?" to "I need details immediately," to "Mom keeps asking if you're dating anyone and I'm running out of evasive answers." I'd told Emma more about Diana, carefully omitting the age gap, but even my edited version was enough to make my sister suspicious that this was more serious than my usual casual dating patterns. "She sounds perfect for you," Emma said during our Sunday call. "Smart, passionate about her work. Appreciate your terrible sense of humor. What's the catch?" "Why does there have to be a catch?" "Because you sound nervous when you talk about her. Happy nervous, but nervous. And you never sound nervous about women unless there's something you're not telling me." I changed the subject before Emma could dig deeper, but her observation stuck. With me, was I nervous? And if so, what was I nervous about? I got my answer Thursday afternoon, when Diana showed up at the coffee shop with news that changed everything. "I have an update on the community center," she said, practically vibrating with excitement as she sat down across from me. "The city council called this morning. They want to move forward with a pilot program." "That's amazing," I said, genuinely thrilled for her. "What changed their minds?" "Apparently, Councilwoman Martinez did some research after our last meeting and discovered that similar projects in Seattle and San Francisco have actually increased property values and decreased crime rates. Suddenly, fiscal responsibility includes investing in community infrastructure." Diana's excitement was infectious. She pulled out her laptop and showed me revised plans, talking quickly about timelines and budgets and the dozens of details that would need to be coordinated. But as she talked, I found myself getting distracted by the way her eyes lit up, the way she gestured with her hands when she was passionate about something, the way she automatically included me in her planning, with phrases like "we could" and "what do you think about?" "Alex, are you listening?" she asked, pausing mid-sentence about permit applications. "Sorry, I was just... You're really beautiful when you're excited about something." The words slipped out before I could stop them. Diana blinked, a flush creeping up her neck. "That's not very professional feedback on my municipal development strategy," she said, but she was smiling. "I'm not sure any of this has been very professional," I admitted. "No," she agreed quietly. "Really hasn't." We looked at each other across the table, and I felt that familiar electric tension that had been building for weeks. The space between casual coffee meetings and something more serious was getting smaller every day. "Diana," I started, not sure what I was going to say next. "I know," she said softly. "I feel it too." Before either of us could figure out how to navigate that moment, Jake appeared at our table carrying what looked like a portfolio case and wearing the kind of grin that meant he was about to cause trouble. "Perfect timing," he announced, dropping into the third chair. "I have something to show you both." "Jake," I said in a warning tone, "what did you do?" "Nothing terrible," he said, which was never reassuring coming from Jake. "I just happened to have been working on some preliminary design concepts for community center signage and wayfinding systems." He opened his portfolio and spread out a series of beautifully designed mock-ups, logos, directional signs, even concepts for a mobile app interface that could help visitors navigate the space and access resources. Diana stared at the designs with obvious amazement. "Jake, these are incredible, but I never asked you to." "Alex mentioned the project," Jake said casually, "and I may have gotten a little carried away thinking about how to make the space more accessible and user-friendly. Plus, I figured if Alex was going to keep making heart eyes at you over community development, the least I could do was contribute something useful." "Heart eyes?" Diana asked, raising an eyebrow at me. "Ignore him," I said, though I could feel myself turning red. "But the designs really are amazing." "The point is," Jake continued, clearly enjoying himself, "Alex isn't the only one who believes in what you're doing. And if you ever need pro bono graphic design work for community projects, I'm in." Diana looked between Jake and me with something like wonder. "You two have been talking about my project?" "Diana," I said, "we talk about your project because it's genuinely exciting work, because what you're doing matters, and because..." I paused, realizing I was about to cross a line I couldn't uncross. "Because I care about things that are important To you, the silence that followed felt charged with possibility. Jake, for once, seemed to sense he should make himself scarce. "I'm going to get another coffee," he announced, gathering up his designs. "Diana, these are yours to keep. Alex, try not to say anything too romantic while I'm gone. We're in public." As Jake headed toward the counter, Diana reached across the table and took my hand. "Alex," she said quietly, "what are we doing here?" "Think," I said, looking down at our intertwined fingers, "we're figuring out that some things are worth taking risks for. Even when those risks include age gaps and complicated life circumstances, and the possibility that we're both completely crazy." "Especially then," I said, meeting her eyes. "Diana, I don't know what this is, but I know I don't want it to stop." She squeezed my hand. "Good," she said, "because I was hoping you'd say that." And Jake returned to the table 5 minutes later. We were still holding hands and probably still making what he would definitely call heart eyes. But for the first time in weeks, that didn't feel like something to be embarrassed about. It felt like the beginning of something real. By the following Monday, Jake had appointed himself as my unofficial dating strategist, which was both helpful and terrifying. He cornered me at Grind Coffee before Diana arrived, carrying what looked suspiciously like a notebook filled with what he called operation notes. "Okay," Jake said, settling into his chair with the intensity of a military briefing. "We need to talk strategy. You and Diana have been doing this coffee shop dance for 3 weeks now. Hand-holding, meaningful looks, urban planning as foreplay, it's all very sweet. But at some point, one of you needs to make an actual move." "We're taking things slow," I protested. "There's nothing wrong with slow. Slow is fine when you're both 25 and have unlimited time to figure things out. But Alex, she's 53. She's not looking for a pen pal. She's looking for someone who's serious enough to actually pursue her." I stared at my coffee, knowing Jake was probably right, but not sure what making a move looked like when you were navigating a 22-year age gap and the most complicated attraction of your life. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked. Jake flipped open his notebook, which was apparently more detailed than I'd expected. "First, you need to ask her on an actual date. Not a coffee meeting, not a work session. A real date, where the primary purpose is spending time together because you're attracted to each other." "And how exactly do I do that without it being weird?" "You use the community center project as an excuse," Jake said triumphantly. "She mentioned wanting to visit some successful community spaces in other cities for research, right? Offer to drive her to Seattle for the day. Make it about work, but make it clear it's also about wanting to spend time with her outside of this coffee shop." I had to admit it wasn't a terrible idea. Diana had mentioned wanting to see the community center in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, and a road trip would give us hours of uninterrupted conversation time. "What if she says no? Then you'll know where you stand," Jake said bluntly. "But Alex, she's not going to say no. Trust me on this." Before I could question Jake's confidence in his romantic predictions, Diana walked in carrying her laptop bag and what looked like a bottle of champagne wrapped in a brown paper bag. "Celebrating something?" I asked as she sat down. "Actually, yes," she said, unwrapping the bottle with a grin. "The pilot program got full approval. We're officially breaking ground in 6 months." "Diana, that's incredible," I said, genuinely thrilled for her. "Congratulations. It gets better," she continued. "The council wants to make this a model program for other cities. If it succeeds, we could be looking at expanding the concept to Portland's other underserved neighborhoods." Jake, who had been listening to this with growing excitement, leaned forward. "So you're going to be famous? It's like urban planning celebrity status?" Diana laughed. "I don't know about celebrity status, but it's definitely the biggest professional opportunity I've had since going independent. The only problem is I want to do site visits to similar projects before we finalize our approach. Seattle has that amazing community center I mentioned, and there's another one in Vancouver that's supposed to be revolutionary." I saw Jake give me a meaningful look across the table and realized this was my opening. "I could drive you," I said, trying to sound casual. "To Seattle, I mean? I've been wanting to visit the city anyway, and it would give us a chance to really talk through the project without coffee shop distractions." Diana's eyes lit up. "Really? You wouldn't mind spending a whole day listening to me geek out about community spaces and affordable housing initiatives?" Diana, I said, feeling braver than I had in weeks. I can't think of anything I'd rather do. It's a 3-hour drive each way, she warned. Plus, however long we spend at the actual sites, we'd basically be spending the entire day together. Counting on it, I said, and watched her cheeks flush slightly. Okay then, she said softly. It's a date. It's a research trip, with date-like qualities. Jake was grinning so widely I thought his face might split. This is adorable, he announced. You two are like teenagers, trying to ask each other to prom, except with urban planning instead of corsages. Jake, I said in a warning tone. I'm just saying, watching you to figure out how to spend time together, it's like watching the world's most intellectually sophisticated romantic comedy. Diana was laughing now. Jake, has anyone ever told you that you'd make an excellent relationship counselor? Many times, Jake said proudly. I have a gift for seeing what people are too scared to admit to themselves. And what are we too scared to admit, I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Jake looked between Diana and me with obvious amusement. That you're both completely gone on each other, and the only thing standing between you and a real relationship is the fear that admitting it out loud might make it too real to take back. The silence that followed was charged with the kind of tension that makes you hyper-aware of your own breathing. Diana was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, and I realized Jake had just articulated something I'd been trying not to think about for weeks. Jake, Diana said finally, you might be onto something. I usually am, he said smugly. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Diana turned to me. Alex, are you free this Saturday? 'Cause I think it's time we took that research trip to Seattle. I'm free, I said, probably too quickly. Definitely free. Good, she said, standing up and gathering her things. Pick me up at 8. I'll bring coffee and pastries for the road. As she headed toward the door, she turned back with a smile. That made my heart skip. And Alex, thanks for being brave enough to ask. After she left, Jake sat back in his chair with obvious satisfaction. See? Told you she wouldn't say no. This doesn't prove anything, I said, though I was grinning like an idiot. Alex, my friend, this proves everything. Saturday's going to change everything. Looking back, I realized Jake was absolutely right. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of nervous energy that makes you change clothes 3 times and second-guess every decision. I picked up Diana at exactly 8 a.m., finding her waiting outside her apartment building in the Hawthorne district with a thermos of coffee, a bag of pastries from a local bakery, and a smile that made me forget why I'd been nervous in the first place. Ready for our research expedition? She asked, settling into the passenger seat of my Honda Civic, which suddenly felt embarrassingly small and practical next to her effortless sophistication. Ready, I said, though I wasn't sure ready covered the mix of excitement and terror I was feeling about spending 6 hours in a car with someone I was increasingly certain I was falling for. The first hour of the drive was easy. We talked about the community center project, about the sites we planned to visit, out Diana's research on successful urban development models. But somewhere around Olympia, the conversation shifted to more personal territory. Can I ask you something? Diana said, adjusting her position to face me more directly. What were you like in college? I'm trying to picture 20-year-old Alex. Laughed. Awkward. Really, really awkward. I was the guy who spent Friday nights debugging code instead of going to parties. I had this theory that if I just worked hard enough, social skills would eventually develop through osmosis. Did it work? Clearly not, since I'm 31 and my best pickup line involves committing to urban planning projects. Diana was quiet for a moment, and when I glanced over, she was looking out the window with an expression I couldn't read. What about you? I asked. What were you like at 31? Married, she said simply. Gary and I had just bought our first house. I was working 60-hour weeks trying to make partner at the firm, convinced that if I just proved myself indispensable, I'd finally feel like I belonged in those glass conference rooms. Did you feel like you belonged? Never, she admitted. I spent my entire 30s trying to become someone I thought I should be, instead of figuring out who I actually was. There was something in her tone that made me glance over again. Do you regret it? I regret the time I wasted, she said quietly, but not the experience. Those years taught me what I don't want, which turned out to be just as valuable as knowing what I do want. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, NPR playing softly in the background. I was starting to relax, to enjoy the rhythm of highway. Driving in easy conversation when Diana's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and her expression immediately changed. "I should take this," she said apologetically. "It's my daughter. I hadn't known Diana had a daughter." "Hi, honey," Diana answered, her voice shifting to a tone I'd never heard before. Maternal, slightly cautious. "How are you? Is everything okay?" I tried to focus on driving while Diana had what sounded like a tense conversation about someone named Brad, about graduate school applications, and about plans for Thanksgiving that apparently weren't going according to anyone's expectations. "Megan, we talked about this," Diana was saying. "I can't make decisions about Brad for you, but I can tell you that moving in together after 6 months might be... Rachel, slow down. What about Brad?" The conversation continued for 20 minutes, and I found myself getting an unexpected glimpse into Diana's life as a mother to what sounded like a 20-something daughter who was dealing with relationship, drama, and career uncertainty. Diana's responses were patient but firm, loving but boundaried in a way that suggested years of practice navigating complicated family dynamics. "I love you too, honey," Diana said finally. "Call me tonight, okay? And remember, you don't have to make all these decisions right now." After she hung up, Diana sat quietly for a moment, staring at her phone. "Everything okay?" I asked gently. "My daughter Megan," she said. "She's 25, just finished her master's degree, and currently convinced that every decision she makes will determine the entire trajectory of her life. She's also dating someone who... double quotes, Diana paused. "Someone who's probably not right for her, but she has to figure that out herself. That must be hard. Watching her make mistakes you can see coming. The hardest part of parenting," Diana agreed. "Especially when your daughter is almost the same age as... She stopped abruptly. "The same age as what?" Diana turned to look at me with an expression that was part apology, part realization. "Alex, my daughter is 25. You're 31. You're closer in age to my child than you are to me." The words hung in the car like a challenge neither of us had been prepared for. I felt something cold settle in my stomach as the mathematics of our situation became suddenly starkly clear.
Oh.
"Does that bother you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know," Diana said honestly. "It didn't occur to me until just now, listening to her talk about her boyfriend problems. You could theoretically be her peer group." We drove in silence for several miles, both of us processing this new dimension of our age gap. I found myself wondering what Megan would think of her mother dating someone barely older than she was, what Diana's friends thought, what my own family would say when they found out. "Alex," Diana said finally, "can I ask you something honestly? When you think about introducing me to your friends, to your family, are you nervous about explaining our age difference?" The question hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. I thought about Emma's impending visit, about how I'd been carefully avoiding specifics about Diana's age, about the way I'd instinctively changed the subject whenever anyone asked too many details. Sometimes, I admitted. "Not because I'm ashamed of you, but because I'm worried they'll think I don't know what I'm doing. Do you know what you're doing?"
I
Pulled into a rest stop parking lot and turned off the engine. We needed to have this conversation properly, not while I was trying to navigate highway traffic. "Diana," I said, turning to face her completely, "I have no idea what I'm doing. I've never dated anyone your age. I've never had to think about generational differences or life stage compatibility or any of this. But I know that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. How do you feel about me? Like I want to know everything about you. Like I want to be part of whatever you're building. Like the age difference matters less than the fact that you make me want to be braver than I've ever been." And I reached across the console and took my hand. "Alex, I need you to understand something. Dating me isn't just about dating me. It's about dating someone who has a grown daughter, who has decades of history you weren't part of, who might want different things from a relationship than someone your age would want. What do you want from a relationship? I want partnership, she said without hesitation. I want someone who's done figuring out who they are, who's ready to build something together instead of just having fun while they decide what they really want. I looked at her hand in mine, at the lines around her eyes that spoke of years of experience I didn't have. At the confidence that came from surviving disappointments I couldn't imagine. I want that too, I said quietly. The question is whether. You think I'm capable of it? Diana was quiet for a long moment. Let's go see these community centers, she said finally, and let's see if we can figure this out together. As we got back on the highway, I realized our research trip had become something else entirely. A test of whether what we felt for each other was strong enough. To survive the reality of what a relationship between us would actually mean, the Seattle Community Center was everything Diana had hoped it would be, a beautifully designed space that managed to feel both modern and welcoming. With natural light streaming through carefully placed windows and common areas that actually encouraged people to gather and connect. We spent 3 hours there, talking to staff members and residents, and I watched Diana take notes with the kind of focused intensity that reminded me why I had been drawn to her in the first place. On the drive back to Portland, something between us had shifted, not broken, exactly, but different. More careful. We talked about the community center, about design elements Diana wanted to incorporate into her project, about budget considerations and timeline challenges, safe topics that kept us in the realm of collaboration rather than whatever we'd been moving toward before her daughter's call. The real test came. The following Wednesday, when Diana invited me to what she called a project celebration dinner at her apartment, what she failed to mention was that it wouldn't be just the two of us. Alex, Diana said, opening her front door with a slightly nervous smile, I want you to meet some people. Her apartment was gorgeous, exposed brick walls, carefully curated artwork, and the kind of furniture that managed to be both stylish and comfortable. It was also full of people who were very clearly not 31 years old. Everyone, Diana announced. This is Alex, the developer I've been telling you about who's been helping with the community center project. The introductions were a blur of names and professions that painted a clear picture of Diana's social circle. There was Rebecca, a 49-year-old documentary filmmaker who'd just returned from 6 months in Central America. Marcus, not my Marcus, but a different Marcus, was a 45-year-old professor of urban studies at Portland State. Sarah, a 52-year-old gallery owner, was discussing the intersection of public art and community development with Alina, a 47-year-old nonprofit director who'd known Diana since their graduate school days. I was, by at least 15 years, the youngest person in the room. So Alex, Rebecca said, settling next to me on Diana's couch with a glass of wine that probably cost more than I usually spent on groceries. Diana tells us you're a freelance developer. What's your specialty? I launched into my usual explanation about small business websites and app development, but I could feel the subtle assessment happening around me. These weren't hostile people. They were warm and genuinely interested, but I was clearly being evaluated as Diana's, what, colleague, friend, something more? That's fascinating, Marcus said when I finished explaining the urban gardening app. You know, there's been some interesting research on the role of technology and community engagement among different age demographics. Are you familiar with Dr. Chen's work on digital divide implications in urban planning? I was not familiar with Dr. Chen's work, and the conversation quickly moved into academic territory that made me feel like I was auditing a graduate seminar I wasn't qualified to attend. Diana, I noticed, was watching me carefully, probably trying to gauge how I was handling being the obvious outsider in her friend group. Alex, Alina said during a lull in the discussion about municipal policy frameworks, how did you get interested in community development work? It's not a typical path. For someone in tech? Honestly, I said, deciding that honesty was my only shot at not coming across as completely out of my depth. I didn't know anything about urban planning until I met Diana, but listening to her talk about community, spaces, and how technology can serve people instead of replacing human connection, it made me want to learn more. The room went quiet for a moment. I realized I'd just revealed more about my relationship with Diana than either of us had probably intended. That's lovely, Sarah said with a smile that seemed genuinely warm. Diana has a gift for making people care about community development. She converted me from thinking urban planning was just about zoning laws to understanding it as social justice work. How long have you all known each other? I asked, trying to redirect attention away from my obvious Diana-inspired interest in urban planning. Diana and I were in graduate school together, Elena explained. That was ... God. Almost 25 years ago. Rebecca and Sarah we met through various projects over the years. We're like a little professional family at this point. Years. When Diana was in graduate school, I was 6 years old. The conversation continued, moving through topics that ranged from local politics to travel stories to professional updates that spanned decades of shared history. I contributed where I could, but mostly I listened, getting a window into Diana's life that was both fascinating and intimidating. These were accomplished, sophisticated people who'd known Diana through her marriage, her divorce, her career transitions. They had supported her through professional setbacks and celebrated her successes. They were her peers in every sense of the word, and I was ... What was I? Alex, Diana said, during a brief moment when the others were debating the merits of a new restaurant in the Pearl District. How are you doing? I know this is a lot. They're great, I said, which was true. Really interesting people. But I feel like I'm crashing someone else's reunion, I admitted quietly. Everyone here has decades of history together. I'm the guy who showed up 3 weeks ago with strong opinions about JavaScript frameworks. Diana looked like she wanted to say something reassuring. But before she could respond, Rebecca called out from across the room. Alex, we were just talking about the community center timeline. Diana mentioned you might be developing some kind of tech integration for the space. I spent the next 20 minutes explaining my ideas for community resource apps and digital accessibility features, and to my surprise, the group was genuinely engaged. Marcus had insights about user adoption among different age groups. Elena shared experiences from other nonprofits about technology implementation challenges. And Sarah raised important questions about ensuring digital tools didn't exclude people who weren't tech-savvy by the end of the evening. I felt less like an outsider and more like someone who'd been invited to contribute to an ongoing conversation. But I also felt the weight of everything I didn't know. All the professional and personal history I wasn't part of. All the shared references and inside jokes that came from decades of friendship. As the guests started leaving, Elena pulled me aside. Alex, she said quietly, I hope you know that Diana doesn't usually introduce people to this group. We're pretty protective of each other, especially after what happened with her ex-husband. I appreciate that, I said, not sure what else to say. What I'm trying to tell you is that if Diana brought you here, it means she's serious about you. And if she's serious about you, then we want to get to know you too. After everyone left, Diana and I cleaned up in comfortable silence. But I could feel questions hanging in the air between us. So, she said finally, loading the last wine glass into the dishwasher. What did you think? I think your friends are amazing, I said honestly. I also think I have no idea how to fit into a social circle where people casually reference 25 years of shared history. Diana leaned against the kitchen counter, studying my face. Alex, those friendships took decades to build. You don't have to fit into them immediately. You just have to be yourself. And if myself isn't enough, then they're not the right people, she said simply. But Alex, I think you underestimate how much you impressed them tonight, Rebecca asked. For your contact information, Marcus wants to introduce you to some other developers working on community technology projects. That doesn't happen unless they genuinely like you. As I drove home that night, I realized I'd passed some kind of test I hadn't known I was taking. But I also understood, more clearly than ever, that dating Diana meant entering a world where I would always be the youngest. Always be the one playing catch-up, always be the outsider trying to prove I belonged. The question was whether I was brave enough to keep trying. 2 weeks after the dinner party, I thought Diana and I had found our rhythm. We were meeting regularly, working on technology integration plans for the community center, and slowly navigating the complex territory between professional collaboration and personal relationship. I'd even started feeling comfortable with her friends, particularly after Marcus connected me with a nonprofit in Seattle that needed app development work. Then Gary showed up. I was at Grind Coffee early on a Thursday morning working on code for the community center's resource booking system when I heard Diana's voice outside, but instead of her usual confident tone, she sounded strained, almost angry. "Gary, I told you on the phone that I can't discuss this here." The window I could see Diana standing on the sidewalk with a man in an expensive-looking suit. He was probably in his mid-50s, conventionally handsome in the way that suggested regular gym memberships and careful attention to grooming. Everything about his posture screamed successful architect who was used to getting his way. 5 minutes, the man was saying. "That's all I'm asking. We can discuss this like civilized adults." Diana glanced toward the coffee shop, and her eyes met mine through the window. The look on her face was a mix of embarrassment and frustration that made me want to intervene, though I had no idea what I'd be intervening in. She said something to Gary that I couldn't hear, then walked into the coffee shop alone. Gary followed. "Diana," Gary continued as they approached my table, "you're being unreasonable about this. The Portland project is exactly the kind of community development work that would benefit from our firm's resources. We could take it from a local initiative to a model for national implementation." "Our firm," Diana said, her voice sharp. "Gary, it stopped being our firm 5 years ago when you decided I was professionally stagnant, remember? That's when." Gary noticed me sitting at the table, laptop open, obviously listening to their conversation. "I'm sorry," he said to Diana. "Are we interrupting your meeting?" Diana looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Gary, this is Alex." "Alex, this is my ex-husband, Gary." Gary's assessment was immediate and transparent. His eyes took in my jeans, my hoodie, my laptop setup, and the obvious age difference between Diana and me. I watched his expression shift from polite acknowledgement to something like amusement. "Alex," Gary said, extending his hand with the kind of firm handshake that was probably meant to establish dominance. "Nice to meet you. Are you working on the community center project as well?" "I'm developing the technology integration systems," I said, trying to match his professional tone while feeling completely outclassed. "Technology integration," Gary repeated. "How interesting." Diana always did have a soft spot for innovative approaches. The condescension in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. Diana caught it too. "Gary," she said sharply, "whatever you came here to discuss, we can handle it over email. Alex and I have work to do." "Of course," Gary said smoothly. "But Diana, think about what I said. The firm has connections with municipal development programs in 12 major cities. We could make this project significant." "It's already significant," I said before I could stop myself. "It's going to serve a community that's been underinvested in for decades. That seems pretty significant to me." Gary turned to look at me with obvious surprise that I'd spoken. "Absolutely," he said, though his tone suggested he thought I was naive. Though I was thinking more in terms of scalable impact, awards recognition. The kind of project that influences policy at the state level. "Right," I said, feeling my temper rise. "Because awards are definitely what's missing from affordable housing initiatives." Diana put her hand on my arm, a gesture that was clearly meant to de-escalate. Gary caught the movement, and his expression shifted to something like understanding. "I see," he said quietly. "Diana, I didn't realize you were." "Well, this explains some things." "Explains what, Gary?" Diana's voice was dangerously calm. "Why you've been so resistant to professional opportunities lately. I understand the appeal of mentoring younger colleagues, but mixing business with personal interests can compromise judgment." The silence that followed was so charged I could practically hear electricity crackling. Diana stood up slowly, and when she spoke, her voice was ice. "Gary, get out now." "Diana, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." She was standing now, and every inch of her radiated controlled fury. "You meant to belittle my work, my judgment, and my personal life, all in one conversation, exactly like you did for 15 years of marriage." Gary looked around the coffee shop, suddenly aware that other customers were watching the exchange. "We'll discuss this later," he said stiffly. "No," Diana said. "We won't. Don't contact me again about the project or anything else." After Gary left, Diana sat back down heavily, her hands shaking slightly. Well, she said after a long moment that was humiliating. Diana, Alex, I need you to know that what just happened, what he implied about us, that's not what this is. Do you think this is? I asked quietly. She looked at me across the table, and I could see her struggling with the question. I don't know, she admitted. But whatever it is, it's not some older woman using a younger man to feel better about herself. It's not you. Being naive about professional relationships. I know that, I said. The question is, do you believe it? Diana was quiet for a long moment. Gary has a way of making me doubt everything I think I know about myself, she said finally, including this. Diana, look at me. She raised her eyes to mine. Gary is an asshole who's threatened by what you've built without him. Don't let him make you question something that feels right. Does this feel right to you? She asked. Even after tonight, even knowing that people are going to make assumptions about us. I reached across the table and took her hand. Especially then, I said, because if we can survive your ex-husband's condescension, we can probably survive anything. For the first time since Gary had appeared, Diana smiled. Alex, I think we might be in this deeper than either of us planned. Good, I said, because I'm tired of pretending this is just about urban planning. The crisis came 3 days later, and it came through Emma. I was at home, working on the community center app interface, when my phone rang. Emma's name on the screen usually meant a casual check-in. But something in the way she said Alex when I answered told me this wasn't going to be a normal conversation. We need to talk, she said without preamble. I just got off the phone with Mom. My stomach dropped. What about? About your girlfriend, Diana? The one you've been very carefully not telling our family is 22 years older than you. I closed my laptop slowly, trying to buy myself time to figure out how this conversation was going to go. How did Mom? Jake posted photos from Diana's dinner party on Instagram. Emma interrupted. Mom saw them, did some detective work, and called me in full panic mode about your midlife crisis and whether she should stage an intervention. It's not a midlife crisis, Emma. I'm 31. That's what I told her. But Alex, you have to understand how this looks from the outside. You've never mentioned a serious relationship. You've been evasive about details, and now Mom discovers you're dating someone who could theoretically be your professor. I walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the street where normal people were dealing with normal relationship problems that didn't require family crisis meetings. What did you tell her? I told her that you're an adult and you can date whoever you want, Emma said. But I also promised I'd talk to you, because honestly, Alex, I'm worried too. Worried about what? About whether you know what you're getting into. I've seen the photos, I've heard how you talk about her, and it's obvious you're completely gone for this woman. But what happens when reality sets in? What happens when you want kids and she's approaching 60? What happens when your friends are settling down with people their own age and you're dealing with her retirement planning? The questions hit like physical blows because I'd been asking myself versions of them for weeks. Emma, I'm not trying to hurt you, she continued. I'm trying to make sure you've thought this through. Because breaking up is one thing when you're dating someone casually. It's something else entirely when you're this invested in someone whose life is fundamentally different from yours. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with another call. Diana. Emma, I have to go. Diana's calling. Alex, promise me you'll think about what I said. I switched to Diana's call, expecting to hear her usual warm greeting. Instead, her voice was tight with stress. Alex, we have a problem. Can you meet me at my apartment? 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Diana's living room while she paced back and forth, holding what looked like a legal document. Gary filed a complaint with the city council, she said without preamble. He's claiming that my relationship with you represents a conflict of interest because you're doing paid work on the community center project. What? I stared at her. It's insane. You're not my client, the city is. It doesn't matter, Diana said, her voice cracking slightly.
Oh.
The appearance of impropriety is enough. The council is launching an investigation, which means the community center project is on hold indefinitely. Gary can't do this. He already didn't, Alex. There's more. She sat down heavily on her couch. My daughter called this morning. Someone told her about ooze, probably. Gary on. She's not handling it well. What'd she say? Diana was quiet for a long moment. She asked me if I was having some kind of breakdown. She wanted to know if I needed therapy or if this was my way of acting out after the divorce. She said dating someone her age made her uncomfortable, and she didn't want to bring her boyfriend around if you were going to be there. The words hung in the air between us like an accusation. I could see Diana struggling with something, and I had a terrible feeling I knew what it was. "Diana," I said quietly, "what are you thinking?" She looked up at me with eyes that were bright. With unshed tears, "I'm thinking that maybe everyone's right. Maybe this is selfish. Maybe I'm jeopardizing everything I've worked for because I fell for someone I should have known better than to get involved with." "You don't mean that?" She stood up again, walking to the window. "Alex, in the past week, my ex-husband has sabotaged my biggest professional project. My daughter thinks I'm having a breakdown, and your family is worried about your life choices. How is any of this worth it? Because what we have is real," I said, standing up to face her. "Because what we feel for each other doesn't have anything to do with what other people think we should want, doesn't it?" Diana turned around, and I could see the doubt that had been building since Gary's appearance. "Alex, maybe Gary was right. Maybe I am compromising my judgment. Maybe I'm being selfish, trying to recapture something instead of accepting. Where I am in my life? And where is that? 53 years old with a grown daughter and a career that shouldn't be derailed by a relationship with someone young enough to be her." "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't let them make you believe that what we have is wrong just because it doesn't fit their expectations." Diana sat back down, putting her head in her hands.
"Alex,
"I can't lose this project. It's too important. And I can't keep watching you defend us to people who think you're making a mistake." The silence that followed felt like the end of something. I could see Diana pulling away, could feel her building walls between us out of fear and doubt and the weight of other people's judgment. "So what are you saying?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "I'm saying maybe we need to step back, figure out if this is real or if we've just been caught up in something that felt good but isn't sustainable. Diana, Alex, please, I need some time to think, to figure out how to save the community center project, to deal with my daughter, to remember who I am when I'm not trying to justify my choices to everyone else." I wanted to fight for us too. Argue that stepping back was exactly what Gary and everyone else wanted. But looking at Diane, exhausted, stressed, doubting everything she'd felt about Usai, realized that maybe the most loving thing I could do was give her the space she was asking for. "Okay," I said quietly. "Dinah, when you're done thinking, when you've dealt with all the external pressure, I hope you'll remember that what we have is worth fighting for." I left her apartment feeling like I'd just lost the most important thing in my life to other people's fears and expectations. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure Diana would fight to get it back. 2 weeks of silence from Diana felt like 2 years. I threw myself into work, finished the community center app despite not knowing if it would ever be used, and fielded increasingly concerned calls from Jake, who kept insisting that I needed to fight for her with the passion of someone who'd watched too many romantic comedies. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus, Diana's urban planning professor friend. "Alex," he said, calling me on a Tuesday evening, "we need to talk. Can you meet me for coffee tomorrow?" I found him at a small cafe in the Pearl District, looking serious and carrying a folder full of documents. "I've been doing some research," he said without preamble, "about Gary's complaint and the city council investigation. I think we can fix this." He spread out papers showing municipal ethics guidelines, precedent cases, and what looked like a detailed legal analysis. Gary's complaint only works if there's actual financial impropriety, or if the relationship began before the professional engagement. But you and Diana met at a coffee shop, started working together after she'd already been awarded the project, and you're being paid by the city, not by her. What are you saying? I'm saying Gary's fishing and the city council knows it. But Diana's so worried about appearances that she's not fighting back. Someone needs to remind her that running from judgment isn't the same as being ethical. That afternoon, I did something that would have been unthinkable 3 months earlier. I showed up at Diana's apartment unannounced, carrying Marcus's research and a speech I'd been rehearsing for 2 weeks. Diana answered the door in sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, looking like she hadn't slept well in days. "Alex," she said. "Surprise, what are you doing here?" "Fighting for us," I said. "Can I come in?" Her apartment looked different, cluttered with legal documents, half-empty coffee cups, what appeared to be multiple drafts of letters to the city council. Diana had clearly been working around the clock to salvage her project. "I brought you something," I said, handing her Marcus's folder. "Proof that Gary's complaint is baseless and that the city council is going to dismiss it." Diana flipped through the documents, her expression shifting from confusion to hope to something like relief. Marcus did this? Marcus, Rebecca, Alina, and 3 other people I've never met who apparently think Gary's an asshole and you're too important to let him derail your career. Diana sat down heavily on her couch. "Alex, even if the investigation goes away, that doesn't solve the other problems. My daughter still thinks I'm having a breakdown. Your family still thinks you're making a mistake." "About that," I said, sitting beside her, "I had a long conversation with Emma yesterday. Turns out once I actually explained who you are and what you do instead of just deflecting her questions, she's pretty impressed. She wants to meet you." "Really? Really? And your daughter?" I took a deep breath. "I think she's scared that I'm going to replace her importance in your life, which I would never want to do, but maybe she needs to hear that from me." Diana looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Alex, what are you saying?" "Saying I love you," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "I'm saying that I want to meet your daughter and convince her that I'm not here to compete with her for your attention. I'm saying I want to introduce you to my family and show them that this isn't some midlife crisis, it's the most real thing that's ever happened to me. Alex, I'm saying that if you were 42, I'd commit to whatever life we could build together. And I'm asking if being 53 really changes that answer." Diana was quiet for a long moment. I could see her processing everything, the research that cleared her professionally, the possibility that our families might come around, the question of whether what we felt for each other was worth the complications that came with it. "You really love me?" she asked softly. "I really love you. Even if it means learning about municipal zoning laws and attending dinner parties where I'm the youngest person by 15 years and dealing with ex-husbands who think I'm a naive kid. Especially then." Diana reached for my hands, holding them in both of hers. "Alex, I love you too. I've been miserable without you. I've been trying to convince myself that walking away was the responsible thing to do. But all I've done is miss you and regret letting other people's fears matter more than what we have. So what do we do now?" Now Diana said, standing up and pulling me with her. "We go fight for the community center project together. And then we introduce me to your sister and you to my daughter, and we figure out how to build a life that works for us instead of for everyone else's expectations. Even if people think we're crazy, especially if people think we're crazy," Diana said, and kissed me with the kind of passion that made me remember why I'd been willing to risk everything for this. "Besides, maybe we are a little crazy, but sometimes the best things in life require a little madness." 6 months later, the community center broke ground with Diana as lead planner and me as technology integration specialist. Emma and Diana bonded over their shared love of true crime podcasts. Megan, Diana's daughter, still thought we were weird but admitted I was surprisingly not terrible for someone dating her mother. Gary moved to San Francisco and stopped bothering us entirely, and every morning, Diana and I met at Grind Coffee, where it all started with an awkward joke about committing to urban planning projects, because sometimes the most ridiculous pickup lines lead to the most real love stories, and sometimes taking a leap of faith with someone 11 years older than you is exactly the risk worth taking. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.